Every year, Africa pays over $5 billion in toll fees just to send money to itself. This year, the lot begins to return to its rightful owner. In October 2025, a regional digital payment platform came online. A shop in Malawi can now sell goods to Zambia and receive payment in its own currency within seconds. Transaction fees that once climbed as high as 8% have dropped below 3%. The moment was quiet, but history bowed its head. For the first time in decades, Africans no longer have to go through New York or London just to touch their own money. People often think of infrastructure as roads, bridges, factories, or power grids. But there is something even more decisive to a nation's destiny: the flow of its money. A country can build a dam in a few years, but it can take decades, even a century, to build a truly sovereign monetary system. Because money is not just paper with numbers, it is the heartbeat of an economy. And when that heartbeat is controlled from afar, every vein in the nation's body depends on someone else's pulse. In Lagos, an importer of medicine needs US dollars to pay for a shipment from India. But the central bank says the foreign exchange quota has run out. In Nairobi, a small coffee exporter waits 10 days to receive payment because the transaction must first pass through London, converting shillings to dollars, then back to shillings again. In Harare, each time the US Federal Reserve raises interest rates, the Zimbabwean dollar plunges like a falling stone. Fuel prices, wheat prices, medicine prices all soar, triggered by a signature made on the other side of the world. Do you see the pattern? A breeze in Washington can turn into a financial storm in Africa. A frown on Wall Street can take dinner off the tables of millions in Lusaka. It sounds exaggerated, but it isn't. It happens every single day. And it all comes down to one thing: we do not own our own monetary infrastructure. Money, in the end, is no different from a transport system. When the roads are controlled by others, you must ask permission to move. And they can set up toll gates anywhere, anytime. We live in a world where financial highways were designed to serve the powerful. The dollar is the compulsory transit station, while local currencies, the CFA franc, naira, kwacha, cedi, are merely trailing carriages waiting for the signal to move. Each year, Africa pays over $5 billion in transaction fees just to send money to itself, not to the world, to itself. $5 billion, enough to build thousands of schools, hundreds of hospitals, or bring electricity to millions of homes, quietly drained away into invisible intermediary fees, because every stream of money must pass through checkpoints in New York or London. You may never have thought of it this way, but monetary dependence is also a form of political dependence. When a country cannot settle payments in its own currency, it is not truly free. When local businesses cannot trade without passing through the dollar, their markets remain tied to an external axis of power. A financial expert in Accra once said, "We talk a lot about independence, but few realize that true independence begins the day we can buy and sell with each other without asking another man's currency for permission." That simple sentence reveals a painful truth. Political freedom without financial freedom is only half a freedom. Monetary infrastructure is not just cables and clearing servers. It is a structure of trust where people believe in the strength of their own economy. Only then will capital stop flowing outward, stop enriching others, and begin to nourish its own soil. A road can connect two regions, but a sovereign monetary system can connect an entire continent. And that is where the journey of de-dollarization begins. Not with declarations, but with small ordinary payments that, for the first time, move straight ahead, passing through no one else's hands. Every revolution begins with a small change. In Africa, this one did not start with gunfire. It began with a single click. In October 2025, in Lusaka, the capital of Zambia, a quiet transaction took place. A maize cooperative in Malawi sold its first shipment to Zambia through the new intra-African payment system. No dollars, no intermediary banks, no week-long wait for funds to clear. After just 14 seconds, the payment was confirmed in kwacha and Malawian kwacha. No one clapped, no ribbon was cut. Yet for those who had spent years waiting days for their own money to arrive, that moment was nothing short of liberation. For the first time, Africans could pay one another in their own currencies. The system is called PAPS, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. At first glance, it sounds like just another piece of software. But in truth, it is a new circulatory system for the continent. Instead of routing every transaction through New York or London to be washed in US dollars, payments are now cleared directly between African central banks. The Bank of Ghana pays in cedis. The Bank of Kenya receives in shillings. Only the net balance between the two countries is settled periodically. And the results? Transaction costs have fallen from 8% to under 3%. Settlement times have dropped from several days to mere seconds. Millions of small businesses, once shut out of cross-border trade because of foreign exchange costs, can now join the regional market. A soap manufacturer in Abidjan can sell to Dakar without ever touching a dollar. A cotton farmer in Burkina Faso can pay a textile partner in Benin without maintaining a US bank account. A logistics firm in Kigali can pay a shipping line in Dar es Salaam the same day, no more waiting for clogged SWIFT wires to clear. This isn't just convenience. It's the restoration of economic dignity. For decades, intra-African trade has been held back not by lack of goods, but by the absence of financial infrastructure to sustain trust. A Zambian trader hesitated to accept Malawian currency for fear of exchange losses. A Nigerian exporter avoided selling to Ghana, knowing double conversion fees would erase his profit. And so goods were shipped out of Africa and then back in just to be exchanged for a trusted dollar. But since PAPS came online, that trust has been recoded in technology instead of being outsourced to foreign institutions. Each transaction is a quiet declaration. We can trust one another in our own money. The change feels like a river reopening after years of blockage. Money begins to flow naturally again between neighbors. Intra-African trade, once barely 15% of total commerce, is starting to accelerate. Forgotten trade routes are awakening, from Bamako to Accra, from Gaborone to Harare. And the most powerful shift? It doesn't just enrich big investors. It empowers ordinary people. Because when payments become faster and cheaper, it is the smallest players, the street vendor, the farmer, the craftsman who feel the difference first. That is the true meaning of sovereignty. Not closing the door to the world, but opening it without bowing your head. A young entrepreneur in Kigali put it simply, I used to pay an extra $40 just to send 500 to Kenya. Now I pay in Rwandan francs. They receive in Kenyan shillings and the fee is so low I don't even bother checking it anymore. He laughed, but behind that laugh was something profound. When money returns to the people, trust returns too. The regional payment system is not just changing how money moves, it's changing how Africans see one another. No longer isolated markets, but a continent reconnecting through the steady, rising heartbeat of its own economy. No nation can thrive in isolation, but no economy can grow strong if it must bow its head every time it trades. That is the fragile line between connection and dependence, between cooperation and submission. Africa has lived on that line for far too long. Since the 1,960 seconds after winning political independence, many countries have remained bound by invisible threads to their former empires. Financial systems, banking networks, insurance, and international payments all still routed through the control towers of the dollar and the euro. Whenever the West imposes financial sanctions on any country, the aftershocks ripple across the entire continent. A single bank in Lagos disconnected from the SWIFT network can paralyze hundreds of businesses. A change in US monetary policy can make food prices in Ouagadougou soar overnight. Africa has learned these lessons in sweat and blood, and now it is beginning to rewrite the rules. We don't want to cut ourselves off from the world, said a finance minister from the ECOWAS bloc. We just want to speak to the world in our own language. What does that mean? It means that instead of depending on a single global payment structure, one that revolves around the US dollar, Africa is building parallel, interoperable networks, opening the way to a new monetary order, a multipolar world of money. Look at the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They are already trading in their own currencies, building payment systems outside SWIFT. Africa understands this. To defend economic freedom, you must create multiple roads for money to travel. A wise nation does not burn bridges, but it never entrusts its entire life to just one. That is why, alongside the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, African countries are linking up with new bilateral and multilateral platforms. Some are joining the BRICS Pay network, others are testing interoperability with Russia's MIR system, and some are developing regional e-wallets based on blockchain, where clearing no longer depends on Western servers. Each project is a brick in the wall of financial self-reliance, but a wall with doors, built to let the wind in, not to shut the world out. Because sovereignty does not mean seclusion. True sovereignty means opening your doors while standing tall. The lesson of 2022 still lingers. When several nations were cut off from SWIFT for political reasons, the freeze didn't just hurt governments, it broke lives. Salaries stopped flowing. Imports stalled. Medical aid was trapped in limbo. Africans saw clearly. A single keystroke in another hemisphere could paralyze an entire continent. And so they are acting not with speeches, but with systems. They are building independent payment networks. They are storing reserves in gold, not just dollars. They are negotiating trade deals settled in local currencies. They are partnering with Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East regions, also seeking freedom from the dollar axis. This is not rebellion. It is survival. An economist at the African Development Bank once put it bluntly. Depending on the dollar to live is like breathing through a tube connected to another room. If someone flips the switch, you suffocate. Now, Africa wants to breathe on its own. One nation at a time, one central bank, one small business, all are learning to say, we will trade in our own money. Not out of defiance, but out of necessity, out of dignity, out of the will to reclaim their destiny. As the world moves into a multipolar age, the flow of money is becoming multipolar too. No longer will one currency rule them all, but many centers of payment, many paths, many choices. This is the new independence through integration. A kind of connection no longer built on submission, but on equality. And with every transaction that bypasses the dollar, Africa is redrawing the map of the global economy line by line in ink of its own making. When people think of trade, they picture ships leaving ports, containers crossing oceans, or billion-dollar digits flashing on electronic boards. But most of the exchanges that truly sustain human life happen elsewhere in small markets, between neighbors, between nations only a few hundred kilometers apart. And in that quiet, intimate landscape, Africa has forgotten itself. For more than half a century, African nations have exported raw minerals, crops, and crude oil, only to import finished goods, medicines, fertilizers, and machinery at many times the price. A closed cycle of exporting raw, importing refined, a loop that bleeds value outward year after year. Worse still, Africans rarely buy from one another. Did you know intra-African trade accounts for less than 15% of the continent's total trade volume? In Asia, that figure exceeds 60%. In Europe, more than 70%. This means that when Ghana needs grain, it imports from Europe instead of Nigeria. When Kenya needs cement, it orders from the Middle East instead of Ethiopia. Why? Because transferring money is difficult, foreign exchange fees are high, and trust within the continent's own trading system is fragile. And so, the domestic market, Africa's greatest sleeping giant, has been left behind. A continent of 5 billion people, more than half under the age of 25, the fastest urbanizing region in the world, yet importing nearly 80% of its basic consumer goods. Imagine this. If only 10% of those imports were replaced by intra-African goods, the continent could create millions of jobs, thousands of factories, and hundreds of new industrial zones. And now, for the first time, that possibility is real. With local currency payment systems like PAPS in motion, intra-African trade is becoming easier and cheaper than ever before. A tomato farmer in Burkina Faso can sell to a processing plant in Ghana without touching the dollar. A textile company in Benin can buy cotton from Nigeria with a few clicks. A logistics firm in Tanzania can move goods across borders without fearing financial roadblocks. What was once a dream of regional integration is now taking shape, one transaction at a time. In the markets of Lusaka, you now see goods from Malawi, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire more often. In Addis Ababa, young entrepreneurs are building intra-African e-commerce platforms where you can buy from Nairobi, pay in birr, and receive delivery within days. Money, goods, and data are beginning to flow in the same direction inward, toward Africa itself. And here lies the paradox. The more Africa looks inward, the stronger it grows outward. Because only when the domestic market is solid can the continent bargain with strength on the global stage. A self-sustaining Africa, one that trades with itself, will no longer be the world's consumer, but an equal partner in shaping its value chains. But to reach that point requires a profound shift in mindset. To see borders not as walls, but as bridges. To see neighbors not as rivals, but as builders of the same dream. Because a continent is only truly independent when its people can buy from one another, sell to one another, and believe in one another's worth. A researcher in Dakar once said, "Africa is not poor because it lacks resources, it is poor because it hasn't learned to buy from itself." That sentence cut like a blade straight through the conscience of a generation of leaders. Now it is time to rewrite that truth. It is time for every local currency to circle back through the continent so that when a Ghanaian spends a cedi, it doesn't disappear in London, but reaches a Kenyan, a Rwandan, a Beninese, because every coin that returns home doesn't just sustain an economy, it nourishes the dignity of an entire people. There are words that, when repeated too often, begin to lose their meaning. Sovereignty is one of them. It has been shouted from plazas, printed on flags, recited in every declaration of independence. But over time, its essence has been confined to borders on a map, when true sovereignty lies in things far less visible: the right to decide how we live, how we produce, how we trade, and how we grow. And in today's world, economic sovereignty is the deepest form of national freedom. You can have an army, a constitution, a flag, but if your budget depends on foreign loans, if your currency trembles every time the US Federal Reserve makes a decision, if your central bank must ask permission to move funds between neighboring nations, then that is not freedom. It is independence, decorated but hollow. Throughout history, Africa has reclaimed its lands, its governments, its flags, but never fully regained control of its money. Its currencies remain pegged to others. Its reserves sit in European banks, and its biggest contracts in mining, oil, and infrastructure are priced, paid, and settled in dollars. That means every time the dollar strengthens, African sweat loses value. Every time US interest rates rise, African effort erodes. And every time crisis hits the West, an entire continent must tighten its belt to pay for someone else's mistakes. That is why sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a commitment to act. It is Ghana deciding to pay for gold in cedis instead of dollars. It is Nigeria building a domestic oil exchange to end foreign pricing. It is Burkina Faso opening national grain and fertilizer reserves to shield farmers from import shocks. It is every intra-African transaction completed in seconds in the people's own currencies. These are declarations that need no microphones, no conferences, yet they carry more power than any speech. A philosopher once said, "Real power does not lie in the gun, it lies in whoever issues the money." The truth of that statement has echoed through every era. And for Africa, the moment it fully understands this is the moment it begins to rewrite history. Because money is not just a medium of exchange, it is identity and it is faith. When you believe in your own currency, you believe in your country. And when that faith spreads, people stop hoarding dollars, businesses stop exporting profits, banks stop waiting for foreign aid. Money stays home. Value stays home. Wisdom stays home. Perhaps that is the deepest meaning of freedom. Not the freedom to go anywhere, but the freedom not to have to ask. Sovereignty, therefore, is not found in United Nations forums, nor in GDP charts. It lives in the way ordinary people touch their money each day. If they hold their currency with trust instead of doubt, if they see their labor measured by a unit of value they themselves have created, then sovereignty is no longer theory, it is reality. And when that day comes, the world will look at Africa differently. No longer as the continent of untapped potential, but as the continent of people who have reclaimed the key that unlocks dignity, freedom, and belief. Because, in the end, dignity is never granted. It is forged patiently, stubbornly by hands that keep doing what is right, even when the world still doubts it can be done. There was a time when people believed that power lay in weapons in armies, in nuclear stockpiles. But in this century, power flows not through gun barrels, but through money and the faith that follows it. Where money flows, power follows. And for decades, that power did not flow through Africa. It coursed through distant centers, places where decisions on interest rates, exchange values, and global payments were made by people who did not speak the language of this continent. Yet today, something quiet and monumental is happening. A revolution without bullet, a financial uprising from within. For the first time in generations, Africans are no longer waiting for miracles nor pleading for aid. They are redesigning the machinery of their own world, one system, one transaction, one belief at a time. From the clicks of the PAPS payment network, to trade agreements settled in local currencies between Nigeria and Ghana, from the vaults of gold held in central banks, to energy exchanges priced in native money, From millet farmers in Burkina Faso to young entrepreneurs in Kigali, every small transaction is quietly redrawing the financial map of the world. And the most extraordinary part is this: every great change begins with a small act of faith. Faith that your own currency holds value. Faith that your neighbor can be trusted. Faith that a continent once dismissed as a resource supplier can become a creator of worth. When that faith converges, something miraculous happens. Money begins to it stays in the factories. It stays on the farms. It stays in the hands of the people. And when money stays, knowledge stays. Jobs stay. The future stays. This is the African miracle, not born of aid, but of awakening. No one can give you dignity. You reclaim it step by step. No one can teach you freedom. You define it yourself through the currency you create, through the hands that no longer reach out to borrow. We are witnessing a turning point in history, a moment when a continent stops asking the world, what are we allowed to do? And starts asking, which path will we choose? And that question is not just for Africa, it is for every nation, every person living in a system where monetary power has long been someone else's privilege. So now, ask yourself, are you living in an economy you control or one that quietly controls you? If you believe the age of dependency is over, if you believe that economic dignity must be built by the hands of the people themselves, then choose your stand. A believe in a bold, self-reliant Africa ready to step out of the dollar's shadow. B, believe in a steady, determined Africa, moving carefully but building strong foundations. And don't forget to subscribe to keep following the journey of those rewriting their destiny, not through promises, but through action. Because only when the flow of money is set free can the dignity of humanity be truly reborn. Late afternoon in the Sahel, the sun burns red, sliding slowly over golden fields of ripening millet. Children's laughter rises with the wind, echoing around newly built wind turbines. The whole land glows beneath the sunset, a light born not only of the sun, but of faith, returning after a long absence. Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, Zambia, Kenya, Nigeria, each nation is a fragment of a larger story, the story of people reclaiming authorship of their own destiny. Not with weapons, not with resolutions, but with quiet, daily acts, planting a crop without debt, opening a factory without dollars, making a payment in their own currency. From the outside, these may look like small transactions, but look closer, and you will see a resurrection unfolding. A new generation is rising, one that no longer sees the dollar as the only measure of worth. They understand that freedom does not begin with a slogan. It begins with belief, belief sown into every coin they earn, every note they print. In small offices in Ouagadougou, young engineers are writing the code for regional payment systems. In northern Ghana, women's cooperatives are running microfinance funds in local currency. In Lagos, fintech startups are building homegrown e-wallets so people no longer pay unfair fees to foreign platforms. Different place, different people, yet all are working toward one purpose, to pull dignity back to where it belongs, into the hands of the people. The world once said Africa survives only on aid. But now, Africa is teaching the world that self-reliance is the purest form of respect. Not rejecting cooperation, but choosing to cooperate from a place of equality. Not closing itself off, but opening up in its own voice. When money ceases to be a chain and becomes a tool of freedom, when transactions no longer circle through distant capitals, but flow directly from one citizen to another, when the sweat of farmers is no longer priced by decisions made across the ocean, that is the day dignity returns. And when dignity returns, everything else begins to change. Politics grows cleaner, because power can no longer be bought in foreign currency. Economies grow steadier, because value stays within their borders. People grow more confident, because they know their future is written by no one but themselves. Africa is no longer the developing continent. It is the continent redefining what development means, standing upright, walking on its own feet. And this story, in the end, is not only about Africa. It is a reminder to all of us that every people, every person, has the right to live by their own currency and to believe in the worth of their own creation. If you've listened this far and something inside you stirs, leave a comment. I believe in dignity reclaimed, not bestowed. Subscribe. Share this story. Let the voices of those awakening, those rebuilding their world with courage and conviction be heard beyond borders, beyond languages. Because dignity is not an idea, it is a flame. And today, that flame is burning again across the red earth of Africa. Dusk settles over the plains of the Sahel. The sun, a great red flame, sinks slowly behind distant hills. The wind carries the scent of fresh earth, mingling with children's laughter that rises around wind turbines turning gently in the evening air. In Trial City, the earthen homes begin to glow one by one, each window casting a warm, golden light into the violet sky. At the heart of the square, the flag of Burkina Faso ripples in the soft wind. Beneath it, a steel inscription catches the last light of day. Dignity is not given, it is forged by hands that choose to do what is right. A group of workers sit on the steps sharing a simple meal after a long day. They talk about the next harvest, about their first cross-border payment that didn't need a foreign bank, about a son who just won a scholarship in engineering. No one mentions the word revolution, yet in their eyes there is something greater than victory: peace, because they know that for the first time in decades, their future is no longer written by someone else. Here, in a small nation, once called the poorest in the world, humanity is learning a simple truth anew. Freedom is not a gift from the outside, it is a journey reclaimed from within. And development is not the act of imitation, it is the courage to walk your own path. From Burkina Faso to Ghana, from Nigeria to Kenya, the tide is spreading. New intra-African payment systems are going live. Trade agreements in local currencies are replacing dollar contracts. And community by community, cooperative by cooperative, small enterprise by small enterprise, the continent's bloodstream is coming alive. A new era is beginning, not with fanfare or fireworks, but with quiet strength, powerful enough to shake the old order. An era of nations speaking in their own voices, measuring value by their own worth. This story is not Africa's alone. It is a mirror held up to every people searching for their own place in a world built on uneven power. The question stands before us all. Will we keep living in another shadow or step into the light of our own making? If you believe dignity cannot be borrowed, if you believe a nation is truly free only when it can set the value of its own labor, then write your stand below. I choose to stand tall. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this story so that the flame now burning in Burkina Faso can reach every land that is awakening. Because one day when your child asks, "What does freedom mean?" you will be able to smile and say, "It means we can build, trade, and live by our own money, our own minds, and our own faith." That is the promise we make to the future. And that future has already begun.